Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
We're just talking as the broadcast was starting, and I mentioned I have this little saying about bosses. I've had many bosses in my life, and that has nothing to do with this particular broadcast or any of our affiliates. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. It has to do with, back in the 1980s when last time I had a job was 1989. But I came up with this saying, and it's quite universal. Maybe Guineith has some comments about this too, but the saying is, how did that guy get so far on so little, make so much, and stay so long? How did that guy get so far on so little, make so much, and stay so long? That was, a comment I had about many of my bosses. Not all of them, but many of them. I've had a few wonderful, wonderful bosses, supervisors, managers, if you will, vice presidents, presidents. But there were a few that just were marginal at best. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
I'm very well. Does that ring true for you too? Talking about bosses.
Yeah, I don't take direction very well. There's historical reasons and genetic reasons for that.
Yeah. So you just can't help it, right? Yeah.
I tend to question. I ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
I say, is there a better way of doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And I figure out systems. And if people don't agree with my systems, well, my systems work. Mm-hmm. And, it's, if you've got a problem with them, you need to go somewhere else and make up your own system. That's not somebody who, unless I can see that a system works really well, then I'll work with it. Because I can't see any point in reinventing the wheel, to be perfectly honest. But, there's a lot of systems out there that don't work well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, so I can't see the point of going along with them.
When I meet people, sometimes in a setting where I'm the customer and at a checkout station, sometimes they'll say, so how long have you been doing this? Or do you like what you do? And typically, if a person is a young person at a checkout station where I'm paying for whatever I'm getting, they typically hate their jobs, especially if they're working for a large company like Walmart. I haven't met a single person who works at Walmart that says, I just love being at this cash register. It is I get up in the morning and I can't wait to get to work and stand here and meet all these wonderful customers. It's never happened. They've never said that. Typically, the response is they look at their watch, and whenever their shift is over, let's say it's 5 o'clock, they'll say, or I'll say, are you having a good day? I'll say, I will at 5 o'clock, meaning when I get out of here.
Yeah, that's, it is sad considering, I think we've gone into this before about the wall Martians.
Yeah.
That particular species of human that happens to, inhabit Walmarts, and some of them apparently live there 24 hours.
Yeah.
They just never leave.
One day, recently, just a few days ago, I said, I was at a store, and just out of the blue, I met the cashier and I said, "Geez, I'm so sorry I'm late." And you know, like, you're late. Nobody ever says they're late, you know, going to a checkout. And it's not like they were closing. It's just, you know, they were going to be open for hours and hours longer. And they just looked at me and they said, "Well, it's good that you're here because now the party can start." And that was a great response.
I thought that was very clever. I thought that was fun.
Very clever. And as I was leaving, the person said, "Well, I guess the party's over because you're leaving." So Guineith, the Queen.
Yes.
What does the Queen do? Because I've asked people who live in England, who love living in England, so what does the Queen do? And the answer I get, well, she's the Queen. Okay, what does she do? Well, she's the Queen. And they can't tell me. So,
yeah.
But you can.
Yeah, that's right. The Queen has a number of titles, but two of the most important titles that she has, and the reason why she's actually there. And if she didn't have these job descriptions, there would be absolutely no point in her even continuing to be there. One of them is Defender of the Faith. That means the Christian faith. And Defender of the Realm. Okay? She has the job of defending her country from foreign attack. And also, you know, if there's any treason that emerges domestically, it's obviously her job to make sure that that does not take root. That's her job. And, you know, if she can't do that or won't do that, there's really no point in her being there anymore. And my family is long-term, multi-generationally, actually personal friends with the royal family. Okay? So I'll have to have that disclaimer there. I've never met any of them. But my grandmother, Ethel Crawford, who was the granddaughter of the Earl of Lindsay, used to go over to the Queen Mum's place for cups of tea on a regular basis because they were socially connected and they were personal friends. So I have to make that disclaimer there. But it does give me some insight, and to just say, well, this is the reason why she's there. This is the reason why they are there. They are not there. They are absolutely not there to line their own pockets and tax you. Okay? That is not their job. And is, in fact, every time in history, as soon as royalty has started taxing the populace of their own country, the royal claim to power has weakened considerably. And, you know, it's only really been a matter of time before they have been toppled. And I am not in favour of the royal family being toppled. Absolutely not. But I feel that I need to, you know, to come on air and I need to say these are extremely dangerous times for every nobleman, every noblewoman, everyone of noble descent throughout the whole former British Empire and throughout the English-speaking world, to be perfectly frank, because there are a lot of people of noble descent in America as well. And they, you know, the thing about nobles is that they're just like greyhounds chasing rabbits with regards to running things. They've been running, their families have been running things for many hundreds of years, and they often get into positions of running things just because they're good at it. You know, so that and then you find out after the fact that their family was a old-time noble family, and I think there was, you know, it came out a number of years ago in the press that every single U.S. president, except for probably one or two, were all descended from Henry V, for instance. So, which means that genetically, all of the presidents, except for a handful, maybe 1, 2, or 3, were all royalty. So it just happens that way, that they are good at running things, that they know how to run things, and that's just what ends up happening, you know. And you get some families, motor mechanics, generation after generation after generation, the family just spits out motor mechanics. Other families are painter and decorators. Other families are criminals. You get some families and they just can't help themselves. They're multi-generational kleptomaniacs. And it becomes a real problem when they end up in positions of power, which is, you know, happening all too often these days as well.
I think you're speaking of the U.S. Congress.
Well, it's all parliaments, actually. You know, it used to be back in the day that you could not have a seat in Parliament unless you were independently wealthy, because they didn't offer a salary. And Australia was one of the first parliaments to offer a salary to their parliamentarians. And, you know, something that I was listening on the news on Town Hall about Australia's constitutional crisis. Well, how about we keep to the bit of the Australian Constitution that says that they ought to be paid £5 a year? Mm-hmm. How about we keep to that part of our Constitution? Because that's still in our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And even if you say £5 of, you know, silver, £5 sterling, that's still not, you know, a tremendous amount of money, really. I would, you know,
mm-hmm.
given that silver is $17 an ounce thereabouts, and there's 16 troy ounces in a pound, and that £5, that's still not a lot of money, not compared to what they're paid now.
Well, I just did a conversion. 5 British pounds equals $6.79.
Let's pay the Australian parliamentarians their dues as required in the Australian Constitution.
Yeah, and let's pay the U.S. Congress the same.
A year.
Let's pay the U.S. Congress the same amount and tell them to all go home. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Guineith Isaacs is with us, live in Australia. Class, Guineith Isaacs is with us. And if you'd like to learn more about her, you can go to USA Prepares and click on the Instructors tab, USAPREPARES.com. Click on the Instructors tab. You'll find Guineith Isaacs, and there's links to the internet that'll take you right to learn more about Guineith Isaacs. Guineith, earls, dukes, knights, nobles. Why don't we start with nobles? What are nobles? What makes a person a noble?
Okay, well, if you're a noble, you can be from a noble family, okay, which is one of quite a number of ancient families. I've met nobility from Papua New Guinea who are Papuan nobles, princesses. And, it means that their family was running the show on a hereditary basis for a very, very long time. Okay, and it, you know, like I say, it doesn't necessarily have to be formally recognised by any government, because you get many Irish noble families, and they have even the titles of Earl and so on, okay, or Count or so on like that, and they are according to the ancient Irish order of, nobility, and they're not recognised by the British Crown, because the British don't recognise anything that the Irish government does, because they've got a long history of not getting on well with them. Basically, I think that's putting it rather diplomatically. But like I say, it's a family in a particular culture that has the hereditary duty of managing things for the benefit of all their people. And they are considered to be the noble families. And it's a really, really funny thing because somehow along the line, most of them are related to one another. Even if you go, into, how can I put this, intercontinentally, like I mentioned about the thing about Henry V and most of the U.S. presidents being descended from him. Actually, that includes Barack Obama. So I don't know quite how that happened, but it's true.
Yeah, I read the same thing.
Yeah, this is, and it's absolutely remarkable. So you're talking about a group of people who seem to, they're genetically linked. They run the show all over the earth, and somehow, no matter where they come from, they're all related to one another. And, that they all communicate with each other. Okay? And if you ask them, on the nobility basis, if you ask them, why are you nobles? They say, we trace our genealogy back and we go back to this particular noble family or that particular noble family, and it's absolutely astounding how many of these noble families actually come from either India, Greece, or Egypt, even the ones in the West, especially the ones in the West. And they have been running the planet since ancient times. And if you look at, they did a DNA analysis recently of Egyptian mummies in tombs. So this was nobles going back 3,000 and 4,000 years in some cases. And what do you know? They had red hair, and they had blonde hair, and they had blue or green eyes. So, that's, so if you go further and investigate further, you find out that actually they were Greeks, or they were Berbers, okay? And if you look at the Berbers today, there's a very, very high proportion of Berbers who are white-skinned, fair-haired, and green-eyed, and yet they will tell you that they have been African since the dawn of time. It's a very, very interesting topic to study.
Fascinating. We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and we're talking about the Queen. And I just looked up the presidents of the United States whom were related to British royalty. Let me just go down this list. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and it will probably surprise many. So these are presidents related to British royalty: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, Franklin Pierce, Rutherford B. Hayes, who's also known as Rutherford B. Hayes, Grover Cleveland, Theodore Roosevelt, William Taft, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and
That's one of ours. Jimmy Carter's actually a relation of mine.
That's great.
Carter, and so is he.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
So George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and they were both descendants of Edward I of England and Robert II of Scotland.
Gosh. That explains it. Oh my gosh, he was the worst, except for King John. Mm-hmm. Edward I was the worst king that England ever had.
King John?
Yeah. King John was the worst king England ever had. Unanimously.
And Barack Obama, who was a descendant of Edward I of England and William
You're
the Lion
kidding.
of Scotland. No, I'm not.
What was that?
Barack Obama was the descendant of Edward I of England and William the Lion of Scotland.
William the Lion.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah,
here's another...
You have to wonder how that happened. And, of course, what counts here is the direct male line, right? It's not just a random line through the ancestry. It's the father of the father of the father of the father. That's how these things are calculated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so somewhere along the line, one of Edward I, well, that explains why we're in so much trouble, because Edward I was a monster. He absolutely was. He was evil, and if you can see why I have not really, I don't like the Bushes. I don't personally know the Bushes or the Clintons, but I'll call them jokingly the Clanton gang, okay? Because I think that it wouldn't be surprising if those two particular criminal organisations were related. Enough said, I think. But, it's amazing. One of my ancestors was, let me think. The Earl of Lindsay, okay, is my grandmother's direct male line. So this is Ethel Crawford, was the granddaughter of the Earl of Lindsay, okay? And the Earl of Lindsay's right back, if you trace their ancestry back, you come to the uncle of William Wallace. And anyone who's seen the William Wallace movie knows that Wallace's father died when he was a young boy, and he was adopted by his uncle. In real life, his uncle was not Argyle, it was the Earl of Lindsay, okay? And the Earl of Lindsay was always one of Wallace's strongest supporters. That was his adopted father. And after Edward I hung, drew, and quartered William Wallace, what he did was he arrested the entire family of the Earl of Lindsay down to the second cousins, and had them all executed, men, women, and little children, even pregnant women in the family. And that family, they were vast. And he arrested all of them down to the second cousins. And my particular ancestor was the third cousin of the Earl of Lindsay and was one of the only survivors out of that whole clan that was that didn't get executed by Longshanks, Edward I. He's a monster, and it does not surprise me one little bit that his descendants have turned into such a scurrilous band. You know, that's it's absolutely disgusting. Now that family, the Lindsays or the Crawfords, we're talking about the same family. Okay, they have two surnames that they use, but they're the one family, and they've been the one family for, as far as anyone can tell, forever and ever and ever. But they sometimes use the surname Lindsay, and they sometimes use the surname Crawford, and in reality, both surnames are theirs. And this is the Crawfords of Balcarras, okay, if anyone wants to know. And the Crawfords of Balcarras have been on their own land since the Stone Age. There's never been anyone else, any other family or any other ethnic group that has occupied that land ever. They are the genuine first people of that land. But what we're seeing here is we're actually seeing a war going on, okay, where you get somebody like, for instance, me, who can trace a direct ancestry back to Crusader Knights, back to an earl who was one of the strongest opponents of one of the most wicked kings that England has ever had, and paid with his life. him and his whole family. And then you have the Bushes and the Clintons and that mob of evil people. And the two are not going to get on. They're never going to get on. But the important thing to note is not all the nobles are evil. You know, not all the blue bloods are evil people. There's a civil war going on amongst them. Okay, and you know, it's something where, for me personally, this is going into a very, very frightening time. Could be frightening if I allowed it to frighten me, but instead I've chosen just to speak up and to say, well, listen, guys, we have to be really, really careful here. If we get rid of all the nobility, okay, we're not going to get rid of the nobility. What we're going to do is we're going to empower the evil nobles to go and kill the good nobles. And here's another one, Ben Fulford. He's the grandson of Alex Fulford. He talks about white hats and black hats, okay, in his work. I don't agree with everything that he says, but in this aspect he's right. There's white hats and there's black hats, and there's a civil war going on. The nobles who are not totally evil really know what's going on, because if you go back 100 years and you go to, I don't know, for instance, Russia, and you see that the royal family in Russia 100 years ago made a complete disgrace of themselves. They admitted a particular black warlock into their circle of confidence, and his name was Rasputin, and he started doing satanic ceremonies and such like, and the ordinary Russian people who are Christians found out about it and decided to get rid of their royal family. And the Bolsheviks stepped up and said, oh, we'll be able to help you with that. And so what they did was they had the entire Russian royal family arrested, lined up against a wall in a basement and shot. That didn't solve things for the Russian people. It introduced communism, which basically put for, 70 years or thereabouts, 70 or 80 years, put the Russian people into a state of complete desperation. Okay? And it didn't stop there with the Russian royal family. Nobility from Russia, all through Russia, were forced to flee the country. Okay? And it turned out that anyone who had any, sort of refinement was just arrested and basically often just either mobbed to death, lined up and shot, beaten, whatever. Okay? But what happened to the country and the ordinary people after that was absolutely terrible. This sort of terror never, ever just stops with the nobles. It's really important for people to realize this. This is why I'm coming forward and saying this, because, this broadcast is going to be archived. It's going to be archived forever. Somebody could pull it up in 10 years' time and say, you admitted on radio that you're descended from the nobles, so we're going to have a pogrom against the nobles, and we're going to arrest you, and we're going to kill you now, but just because you're descended from the nobles and that your grandmother was the granddaughter of an earl. I'm saying this because what happens to the ordinary people after this is absolutely terrible. If you look what happened in communist China, they got rid of their nobility during the communist era. Of course, and probably not all of them were killed, but what resulted after that, after the communists took a hold, was the death of 80 million ordinary Chinese people who were basically minding their own business, even down to, the guy who carted manure on his head. It's not good, and this happens everywhere. And I'm just here today, standing on a soapbox on the radio, trying to sound the alarm that if the British people, or if the American people, or if anyone on the earth gets rid of the nobles, it's going to be bad, bad, bad all around.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. We're talking about nobility and royalty. So, Guineith, my understanding is that when a noble is killed, bad things happen to the people who had nothing to do with the killing of the noble, right? Just the villagers.
That's right. That's right. The villagers who are in the area that he was looking after. Okay. It's historically always been that way. Okay. Because he was the one who would organize resistance to bad people just coming in and doing bad things to his people. And there's a common law principle that applies to nobles, and it's something that every noble on the earth is supposed to do. And you can go anywhere, and this is just how it is. It's called noblesse oblige. Okay, that's Latin. It means the obligation of the nobles to look after the ordinary people, to maintain law and order, to ensure that the poor are not starving, to ensure that there is general economic prosperity and opportunities for people to have gainful employment. Okay? So things that would work against that would be, like, for instance, operating cartels. If he were to impose taxation on his people, he's not supposed to earn his living through taxation. He's supposed to earn his living basically as a farmer. Okay? And he can collect rents from houses that he owns, okay, that are on his land. But, that is providing a service. And there should be areas within his land that are freehold that are not directly ruled by him. Okay, so he will have his farm, and then he will have the village surrounding, and around about his farm there will be small holdings. This is how the British way of life has been managed since ancient times. Okay, so if you were somebody from the village and a piece of land came up for sale, and you were an industrious sort, and you'd managed to save enough money, and you went out and bought the farm, that farm, if it was freehold title, that farm was yours and your descendants forever. Okay? But the thing is, the Earl would own the estate, which, whereas the farm might be like between 5, 10, maybe 50 acres or whatever, the estate was vast. The estate was in the thousands or tens of thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands of acres. Okay? And then periodically the Earl would divide off some of the estate and issue it for freehold title, okay, and sell the land. And he would lose the rights to that land forever. And he knew that, but it was for the continued growth and prosperity of his local area. This is how things should be run, okay? But, if you get the Earl and he begins to operate in a predatory manner, okay, he begins to demand taxation. He begins to, like in Transylvania, they're notorious for this, literal blood-sucking, child abuse, all the rest of it. The locals are going to start resenting him and his whole family. And they're going to make plots and plans on their own to get rid of him, thinking that they're going to be free, okay? And of course his neighbour from across the way, who is his enemy, is going to step in and encourage this sort of dissent. But ultimately he brings it on himself through his bad behaviour. They only do a disservice to themselves by engaging in predatory behaviour against anybody. they're not there for that. That's not what they should do.
We're going to talk more about this. Hour number 2. Nobility. How does it work? Who's related to who? And when I tell you who the cousins are in the United States presidents, you won't believe it. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? History class today. Guineith Isaacs is teaching. And we're talking about nobility. And we started out with, what does the Queen do? What does the Queen do? And we've continued the discussion into nobility, and we talked about the nobility are the protectors of the village, and it is their responsibility to make sure that the villagers are taken care of, including the poor. And so I looked up the relationships among the presidents of the United States and 10th cousins. So who are the 10th cousins in the presidency of the United States throughout history? And here they are. Herbert Hoover and George H.W. Bush are 10th cousins. Herbert Hoover and George W. Bush, are 10th cousins once removed. Gerald Ford and Barack Hussein Obama are 10th cousins once removed. That's Gerald Ford and Barack Hussein Obama. Yes, George H.W. Bush and Barack Obama, also 10th cousins once removed. And George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Now, 9th cousins, Warren Harding and Richard Nixon. Warren Harding and Jimmy Carter. Benjamin Harrison and Calvin Coolidge. Warren Harding and Gerald Ford. Richard Nixon and George H.W. Bush. And Richard Nixon and George W. Bush. Yeah. And so, you wonder why when people are running for the presidency of the United States, they don't say, my opponent's a jerk. Because they're related.
Because they're all one family. By the way, I think I mentioned before, my maiden surname in real life is actually Carter. I'm only 5 generations removed from the Earls of Lubbock, who are the Bonham Carters. Helena Bonham Carter is the granddaughter of the Earl of Lubbock, and her grandmother was the daughter of the British Prime Minister, Lord Asquith. How's that? Herbert Asquith was Violet Asquith's father. Violet Asquith married the Earl of Lubbock and became Lady Lubbock, Violet Bonham Carter. So Helena Bonham Carter and I are actually 5th cousins. It's a small world.
Pretty neat.
It's a really small world.
It is a small world. And the one that's most surprising, of course, is Barack Obama, because most people would say he's a black guy. I'm gobsmacked. Yeah. But not really surprised. Mm-hmm. Because like I say, it really is an international club to a degree to which most people have no idea. Like, if you go back, let's say 150, 160, 170 years, there was a particular Maori chief. His name was called Honeheke. And he went across to England, and he ended up in a particular village called Whitby in Yorkshire. And he was the guest of the local clan chief, who was, surprise, surprise, the Earl of Lindsay. And he did a particular piece of commerce with the Earl of Lindsay. He bought several hundred guns off the Earl of Lindsay in return for gold.
that he had his people panning from the river back in New Zealand, which is the Waikato River, one of the best gold rivers in the whole country. And he took those guns back to New Zealand and did a massive military campaign and wiped out 90% of the neighbouring tribe back in the day. But the thing is that, how did Hone Heke know to go to that town and see that earl to do that piece of business? Well, it's simple, because a previous Earl of Lindsay had something to do with Captain Cook's voyage. That's why he didn't go to London, because Captain Cook came from Whitby. So he knew that this was where he could find friends in high places in the white people's country, England. And it's but this is the way that things have always been done, and it really is gobsmacking. And I don't know the ancestry of Hone Heke. I know some of it, but I don't know anything before, the generation where they left Hawaii and ended up in New Zealand. But I'm sure if you traced back the Hawaiian princes, that you would probably end up in ancient Egypt, and that there would probably be some ancient ancestral line going back to ancient Egypt that would go back to the nobles in England. I'm only guessing here now, okay? But it's like I say, this is really, really amazing, the connectedness amongst the various nobles of the world, including the tribal nobles, including the Africans, the Maoris, the Native Americans, and so on and so forth, as much as they might like to deny it. They're basically one big club.
The first seven presidents of the United States weren't born in America. The first 7 presidents were born in the United Kingdom.
Yep.
We were never taught that. George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson were all born in the United Kingdom. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yep. And I bet that every single one of them, well, we've already proven that all of them were from landed gentry families. All of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, otherwise how would they be related to Edward? How would they be related, all of them, to Henry V? So it sort of makes you look at the world a little bit differently, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And here, when I lived in Virginia, there were these families, the Blue Bloods, as we would refer to them, and they seemed to run everything, all the way back from the time that the land was stolen from the American Indians. And, they were the prominent families. Well, here in Missouri, we have prominent families, and they've been running everything as far as anyone can remember as well. And they are holding on to that power for dear life. They will rally the troops, rally their families, and say, hey, we've got an invader. Got a guy coming from Virginia, and we can't let him get hold of anything. And literally,
he's a Viking.
Yeah. They literally do not want to yield any power to anybody else. They want to keep it the way it is. However, these guys are feathering their own nests. These guys are becoming wealthy off the backs of the little people, which is different from what you're talking about, the historical role of nobility.
To do that.
Right. But that's what they're doing. And they're even getting their women folk elected to the House of Representatives in Missouri. So they're passing on the creed, the faith, to keep themselves in power. And now, as far as the Queen is concerned, isn't one of their creeds protect their way of life, the monarchy, at all costs? Isn't that Isn't that their creed?
No.
No?
They have to protect the faith and defend the realm. That's why they're there. They're not there to feather their own nest. They're actually not under the Magna Carta. They're not even supposed to raise taxes. So any income, they are allowed to have customs and excise. They are allowed to have customs and excise and to control imports. Okay? This justifies the use of a standing navy if you're on an island nation such as Great Britain. Okay? But regarding a standing army, really, I think that the Americans in their Constitution have got that absolutely right, and that is something that the British have forgot, is that you shall not have a standing army. Although there is, of course, a U.S. Army, it's not a part of the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers were in opposition to it, that the populace shall be defended by militias, which come from their own population. Okay? So you have a well-armed populace, and this was the way that it used to be in Britain, or, back in the day, but it's no longer the way now. And that's why you're getting invaded by people from other parts of the world who have a way of life that is foreign to ours and that is antagonistic to ours. And that's going to create multi-generational problems if something is not done to fix that situation now.
Okay, let's talk about how does one become an Earl when we come back. Telephone listen line for USA Prepares is up and running. 605-477-3249. 605-477-3249. Guineith, how does a person become an Earl? What are the mechanics of that?
Okay, well, in ancient times, it was usually, funnily enough, they usually happened to be members of ancient clan chief families, okay? But what they would do is they would have some outstanding feat in battle, for example. Like, for instance, once again, taking my grandmother's family, they were Crusader Knights. And I'm thinking that it was probably some heroic deed during the Crusades that led the king of the day to declare that, to bestow the earldom on them. But in reality, as I mentioned, they were already the chiefs of the clan. They had been the chiefs of the clan for as long as anyone could remember. And, they were on their own clan lands. So this is the reason why Edward I was not able to just boot them off their land, because he didn't give the land to them in the first place. The British Crown didn't give the land to them in the first place. It had been theirs from the Stone Age. Okay? And there's caves on that particular estate which have cave paintings in the caves that were done by my ancestors during the Stone Age. And so that is, the Aborigines would say that's a link to country. The Australian Aborigines would definitely say that. But usually, like I said, it just so happens that most of the people who are created earls in that way, through some outstanding heroic feat of battle, were made earls, happen to be members of the clan chief's family anyway. So you might argue, well, why weren't any of the ordinary people? I don't know, maybe they were. There's certainly cases where ordinary people were, responsible for feats of bravery in battle, and were created earls for that reason. But more often, it was the chief's family that were created thus. Okay, but then you get another type of nobility, which is the traditional nobility. And like I say, even in Europe, even especially among the Irish, they have their traditional nobles, and they trace their, the source of their earldom back through ancient family lines, which ultimately go all the way back, in the Irish case, all the way back to Kazakhstan. Okay? So that's a whole nother story of how the Kazakhs or the Cossacks ended up in Ireland, which I don't have time to say it today. But it is remarkable. This has always been a global network of people. Now, the Queen herself, the members of the royal family, apparently what they say, okay, is that you cannot be a European royal unless you are descended from Sangreal. And they say, well, who's Sangreal, or what is Sangreal? And they claim in their private genealogies that they're descended from Jesus Christ, okay? And that's probably going to absolutely astound a lot of people. I heard the story behind it. It is plausible. Whether it's true or not is another question, but they all certainly seem to believe it.
When we come back, can you tell us the difference between nobility and high nobility? Guineith is with us, and if you'd like to find out more about it, usaprepares.com. Please click on the Instructors tab, and you'll find the links to the internet locations where you can learn more about Guineith Isaacs. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and Guineith, can you tell us the difference between royalty and nobility?
Okay. From what I can figure out, the main one seems to be the royal families of Europe seem to have this, they're all interrelated, okay? And they all seem to have this idea that they are descended from, and I know this is going to be surprising for a lot of the listeners, this is not what I think, okay? This is what they think. This is what they say in their private rooms and chambers, that they are, what they think is that they are descended from the children of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. That's what they think, okay? You can go to the south of France, and there are numerous monuments, churches, cafes, where you will see that translated it says the Three Marys, okay? And who they regard as being the Three Marys are Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the sister of Martha, okay? And what they say is that after the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, Mary Magdalene, who was Jesus, in their view of things, Jesus' earthly wife, found that she was pregnant, and that she and Mary's mother and Mary, the sister of Martha, fled and got on a boat, a fishing boat, and they crossed the Mediterranean and ended up in the south of France, okay? Like I said, this is not something I've made up. You can go to the south of France today and see many, many monuments, towns, cafes, where there is this figure of a fishing boat with three women on board, and the central one is pregnant, okay? And you'll say that this figure is called the Three Marys, and in that part of the world it's extremely well known, okay, the story. That's where the royal families of Europe believe that they are descended from. And they say that you can't be a royal unless you can trace your ancestry back to that child. Now, the nobles generally can't trace their ancestry back to that child. I don't even know that child's name, okay? But all I know is the story, and I've seen the genealogy, that they purport to have, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be true, but I'm not saying that it is true, okay? It could be a variation on the ancient Egyptian god myth where they all believed that they were descended from Osiris, okay? It could be a variation on that. It could be something that people just made up. I don't know, but that's what they say. Now, the nobles, they say that they are descended from the Atlantean refugees, okay? In the case of the Scots and the Irish, they say that they are descended from the Kazakh princes who came from Kazakhstan, which was considered to be northern India, okay? And, in fact, if you go to northern India today, there are certain tribes in northern India who are extremely close linguistically and anthropologically to the Scots and to the Irish. So that story probably is true. But these tribes say that they came from the refugees of Atlantis. So, like I say, you can believe it or you can not believe it. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just saying that this is what they say. And they say that the reason why the Atlanteans were so great was that they were descended from, and this is where it's going to begin to really freak some people out. Like I say, this is not what I think. This is what they say. This is what they believe, okay? You call it whacked out if you want, but I'm not saying it. They're saying it. I'm just saying what they say. They say that that the Atlanteans got their technology from Mars, okay? That's what they say. And that's why they call themselves Aryans, okay? Because Arios in ancient Latin meant from Mars, okay? And that's just what it means, meaning the planet. But, the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks had an astrological religion, and they believed that there was commerce between the inhabitants of Earth and the inhabitants of the other planets, and that the inhabitants of these other planets in ancient history came to the Earth, and that they were the progenitors of the Atlantean technology. So, and that is, I believe, why at the moment the elites are going absolutely balmy over something that they have found in Antarctica, okay? And personally, I believe that Antarctica is probably the location of the ancient Atlantis. That's my personal belief, okay? I believe, because this story of Atlantis is universal. You find it everywhere on the earth, especially India and especially Egypt, but also in other places on the earth as well. But I believe that the main places that the Atlantean refugees ended up was in Egypt and in India, which accounted for the high state of their ancient cultures, was simply that they had the technology. And like I said, if you trace back the ancestry of most of the noble families of the earth, somehow or other they end up either in India or in Egypt, and generally they have fair skin, red or blonde hair, and blue or green eyes, which is in total contrast to the native population there. I hope I haven't, spun too many people out.
I think this is absolutely fascinating. Sitting back in the studio, listening intently to what you're saying. I was doing a little bit of research, and from what I understand, and please correct me if this is not correct, you start out with the king and or the queen. Then from there, their children would be the princes and princesses. Under that, you have the dukes, the duchesses, the marquises, the earls, the viscounts, the barons, the baronets, the knights, the esquires, and then ladies and gentlemen. Is that right?
Yeah. I think that's the order. It's been. I did study all of that at one time, but it's been a long time since I have studied it. But so, there was quite a bit of fluidity within that order as well.
So when we are addressed in an audience, and they finally say, and ladies and gentlemen, are they saying, and all you at the bottom of the barrel?
They're talking about all you people out there.
I think that's what I think, and you know, we feel good, ladies and gentlemen. They're being really nice.
A lady, technically, you had to have some sort of culture and refinement. You couldn't be a lady and a fishwife. It just didn't happen.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And a gentleman was once again an ordinary person, but somebody with some refinement. You know, somebody who had manners. So you couldn't be a gentleman and the local pig farmer. Mm-hmm. So
this is quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really interesting. But like I say, when people hear this for the first time, that these people really, really believe that this is where they come from, it spins them out. Mm-hmm. Until you realize that this is in every ancient culture everywhere, that they believe that their chiefs and that their nobles locally come from somewhere else, meaning that they don't come from this earth, or that their ancestors came from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the fact that this belief is so universal, you know, would tend to make me sort of think that maybe there's something to it. And even in the Bible, it talks about the sons of God who came down to the daughters of men in Genesis chapter 6. And it doesn't quite say where they came from other than up, that they came from somewhere other than this earth. Whether it was interdimensional or whether it was interplanetary even is not quite clear. But there's something that has imparted somewhere along the line some level of extraordinary intelligence and often tremendous height and tremendous strength and tremendous courage that is not seen in regular people, but that the most amazing thing is, you know, that they're obsessed with their bloodline. They are obsessed with maintaining what they call a pure bloodline. Okay? Now, the fact that my family is just about pure blue blood is entirely an accident of history, because my mother's family is actually not related to my dad's family directly that I know of. But they happen to just meet and just fall in love and just get married. And, you know, Dad's family was actually opposed to the marriage because they didn't know who Mum's family was.
Guineith and I will be right back. Getting quite a history lesson today. And so my question at this point is, who will be the next king of England?
I hope it's not Charles. I really hope it's not Charles.
Why do you say that?
Because he's very proud of the fact that he is the direct descendant along the male line of Vlad Dracul, and that he's bought Dracula's castle. And he lives there for about 6 months of the year. That's not going to end well.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying the dark side.
He's married. What was that, sorry?
You're saying that's the dark side.
That's the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely the dark side. And his wife, I think that Diana's assessment of Camilla was absolutely on the money. She's a Rottweiler. She's evil. And, I would not like to be Kate Middleton right now. I think that, Kate ought to really look out for her health and welfare and safety, because Camilla is, she's a Rottweiler, but she's Charles's Rottweiler. It's about the sum of it. And Charles cannot see what she is really like, either that or he's in total agreement with her. And Camilla does not like Kate at all. And so given the past history, you see, if you study history, then you can pick patterns. And just today I was reading an article about Mary, Queen of Scots, and, of how she was the cousin of Elizabeth I and had the right to the Scottish throne at the age of 6 months old. And Elizabeth had her imprisoned, and this was Elizabeth I, had her imprisoned and then executed simply because she had the claim to the British throne, despite the fact that, or the English throne, sorry, despite the fact that Mary, Queen of Scots, repeatedly said that she had no interest in ruling the English. It didn't seem to matter to Elizabeth I. She was obsessed, and, Mary, Queen of Scots was one of the very few people that Elizabeth I beheaded. And I can see rhymes here in history. I can see history repeating itself, that Camilla is power-obsessed, from what I can tell, okay? And that, that the rumors of her involvement with the death of Princess Diana just don't seem to be going away.
That was another question. Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
All right. How about Harry? What is Harry? Harry doesn't look like his brother.
Son. There's no way that he's Prince Charles's son. He's the son of that polo player. In my
You're talking about Hewitt, is it?
Yeah, that's right, James Hewitt. In my humble opinion, of course, I've got no evidence for that assertion, other than he looks exactly like James Hewitt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's but who can blame Diana? She was miserable in her marriage, and Charles. The thing with the British royal family is, because of their obsession with bloodlines, they just got so inbred that they didn't know what to do with themselves anymore. They had to marry out.
And that's why Diana was brought in, right?
Yeah.
They needed new blood. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, this was absolutely fascinating, Guineith. I really appreciate you teaching us history, as I've never heard in a formal classroom ever in my life. And I'm sure that holds true with many of our broadcast class students and instructors. Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much, Guineith Isaacs in Australia.
Have a good week.
You too.
Bye-bye.